let's keep talking about some of the names or lack of names that we're looking at on this SheBelieves Cup roster. We chatted a little bit about the return of Megan Rapinoe. Could we possibly see her reach the 200 cap milestone with this team? Tierna Davidson listed as part of this roster, but in a training camp environment. So she's going to be with the team just in training and to sort of get reacclimated with that experience. She's going to be unavailable for selection in any of these SheBelieves Cup teams. So that was perhaps some of the clarity that we got as well by Andonovski in some of the media availability. And of course, he also got asked about missing names on this one. And Lisa, when we saw this roster drop, talking about it in the first half of this episode, about, we like to see some continuity, big fans of that here at A3, seeing 22 of that 24 player roster returning to SheBelieves Cup. But 22 of 24, that means there's a couple players not listed on this roster. And right away, we noticed Haley Mace was one of those players not among the defender core, but also Sam Coffey, one of those midfielders not among the midfielder core. When it comes to these two players in particular, is that a hit or a miss for you by the coaching staff with these games coming up?
Well, people that listen to Attacking Third and join us live on YouTube, they're already like hitting me in my DMs and my mentions on Twitter being like, hey, there's no Sam Coffey. I know, guys, I read the roster at the same time you did, and I was just as sad as everyone else. I'm sad about Sam Coffey. I am. I think that this is a midfielder that Vlatko Andonovski brought in the middle of July to play games, and we saw an immediate impact from a player like Coffey stepping onto the pitch for the U.S. in that defensive midfield role. She took the pressure in stride and she wore it really proudly to have that role. And that's the first time we saw someone really give Andi Sullivan a run for her money in that defensive midfield spot. I like what we've gotten from Sam Coffey. I mean, Rookie of the Year nomination in the NWSL. This is a former attacking midfielder that was converted to a defensive midfielder under Rian Wilkinson at Portland Thorns and did it really well. But the fact that Coffey has the background of being more of an attacking midfielder, it gives her really good vision on the ball and awareness and understanding of how to play those slip passes. And I think we had a really good balance between when Coffey was playing in that 6 of someone that's just going to keep the ball and play simple, but also be able to break lines and progress the ball forward and move it higher. But again, like, she didn't get any time. Coffey didn't play in the 2 friendlies against New Zealand. So I think that it comes into a factor that there's a reason she didn't get time in those 2 friendlies. And it's because Vlatko Andonovski wanted to see someone like a Taylor Korniak play that role and Andi Sullivan and see how they play alongside Rose Lavelle, who's an 8 without Lindsay Horan in there, and with Ashley Sanchez as well, and Christy Mewis. And Sam Coffey didn't fit into that puzzle piece. Vlatko Andonovski was asked about someone like a Coffey and kind of where she stands, what she needs to do to get back on the roster. And he was very, very clear that this does not mean Sam Coffey is out for the World Cup. It just means that against the SheBelieves Cup competition that the United States will play against, Vlatko Andonovski wants to see a different rotation and try different things in the midfield. He talked about how he gave them a lot more freedom in the second match and the second half of the first match against New Zealand, and he really liked that freedom. He liked what he saw from there, and Sam Coffey wasn't part of that equation. So I am a little sad that Sam Coffey's not on this roster. I think it would have been good competition for her to get into this camp if she got game minutes against any of the competition, Canada, Japan, Brazil. I think it would have tested a player like this. But maybe Vlatko Andonovski doesn't need to see that test, and he's going to look at some other things. But Haley Mace, another one, right? Not on this roster. You initially, I think you named her to your January wish list roster. She got called in.
I think maybe I have maybe like a 2-parted take to that. I just, unlike Sam Coffey, including Mace on my January camp roster wish list was just a part of a continuity of what we've seen from the coaching staff in naming their rosters over the last year to year and a half. Just really needing to call in bodies in light of so many different player absences, whether it's been to injury or players working their way back from maternity leave, or getting to take a look at different type of options in different areas on the pitch, right? So seeing Haley Mace get called in when she did towards the latter stages of 2022 really was part of that equation, that there were players still working their way back in. Emily Fox was one of those players who really got an opportunity in light of a Crystal Dunn working her way back from maternity leave, but Emily Fox also having to deal with some injuries along the way. My goodness, I think she even exited, one of the big games in Europe with an injury. So it was part of that continued equation of like, hey, we need bodies who can help fill in these positions. And I thought she did okay. I thought she did okay whenever with the very limited minutes that she was given. But that being said, as again, we're 6-ish months out from a World Cup, I'm not too surprised to not see her name to the SheBelieves Cup roster specifically. And while I think there's, of course, there's a case to be made for Sam Coffey, I don't think a coach is going to go into his open press availabilities and be like, oh yeah, like this player's they're out, like you're talking about like maintaining morale, like going up into a World Cup, and I don't think that's something that any
no, you never
coach
do that.
wants to disrupt, right? Going into that. So when he's asked about players like a Mace or a Coffey, like I'm sure he's so it doesn't, just because she's not listed on this SheBelieves Cup roster doesn't mean she's out. But I will say that the players that are named to this roster, I'm very eager to sort of see them get a run up, because I think this particular window, this February window, is going to be a real treat. It's going to be such a unique opportunity, not just for the United States women's national team, but for a lot of national team programs that have already qualified for the World Cup, that are already in those prep stages of their World Cup planning, to really get looks at other World Cup competition that they may or may not meet come this summer. So I
All
think
4
that if
teams
we're
are top 11 ranked in
oh
FIFA,
yeah,
right? All
my
4
goodness, I
teams,
mean,
top 11.
when we're talking about just the United States roster right here, right now, we're not actually talking about their opposition. We're not talking about how there's multiple Canadian players who represent NWSL clubs that got called up to their roster, right? We're not talking about the
Brazil.
7 Brazilians that are in preseason camps with their NWSL clubs that also got named to their roster, right? It's this window, this international window is such an exciting and unique time, I think, for so many of these programs that are in that phase of their march to the World Cup to get these looks at. And if you're a player that's not listed on some of these rosters, there's a part of that stings, because I think this window of time, these competitions, these fixtures and matches, these are the ones where you really want to sink your cleats into the pitch and make the coaching staff say, look, I'm a problem. You got to keep me in part of this pool.
You need me to be part of it. I agree completely. And I think we have to kind of rope into this conversation about someone not on this roster as forward Sophia Smith missing from this roster. And not at all surprising. She wasn't involved in the January camp because of an injury alongside Megan Rapinoe, someone that was getting back into it. And the fact that she wasn't listed on this roster, it hurt me a little bit inside my heart, only because this is a player that's now struggling with an injury. And it's not super major, right? It's not anything to write home about in terms of that, but it just sucks for her. As you just said, this SheBelieves Cup is against great competition. It's on home soil. The SheBelieves Cup environment when you're at those games is electric. And someone like a Sophia Smith lives for that. They want that. No player that plays this great game of soccer is ever like, yeah, I'm okay staying home for this one. I'm okay not being there, even if they're not playing, right? I bet you Sophia Smith was like, well, can I still come? Like, can I still be there and watch? Like, you want to be part of it. So I think not having a Sophia Smith there, like due to injury, it's totally precautionary, because there's no need to rush her back. There's no need to bring her into this type of camp when she's one of the top level talents, young talents, right? In the world of football, especially the NWSL and especially on this US women's national team roster. But that's one that I'm like, that stinks. That stinks. Like, fans don't get to watch her now, but it's better this way, right? So she can recover, she can get better.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
And yeah.
I think there's that mix too, though. There's that mix of players that we know are absent because they're still, in the rehabbing stage of their injuries. But I guess for clarity's sake, like I'm talking about more of those players who don't have those nagging injuries that are keeping them out of something like a
Totally.
SheBelieves Cup. So I do think that in light of some of the news cycle that built up to the announcement of this SheBelieves Cup roster, we have our segment out on Sam Mewis, who recently provided an update on her current injury status. She announced on social media that she had to have a second surgery on her knee after really utilizing a ton of 2022 to try to go ahead and come back from sort of post procedure in late 2021. So big setback, I think is a very simple way to put it, but with no timeline to return, that effectively takes her out of contention to possibly being available in any of these games in the March to the World Cup and the actual World Cup itself. So I thought that was something that was very interesting coming out of this press conference with Andonovski, who was asked about the midfield a bit. I myself included on this call. I was very curious if continuity is a big thing for me, right? We're talking about that in this episode and the names on this roster. And I was curious about what we saw in those two friendlies against New Zealand. It's one thing to go out there and try some stuff, right? And try some stuff against a team like New Zealand, a program which you've had a really strong history against, pretty much a winning history in terms of your overall head-to-head, right? But now you're going into the SheBelieves Cup, where there's a different level of competition in Brazil, Canada, and Japan. So are we going to continue to see what we saw a little bit against New Zealand, where we got to see the introduction of a Taylor Korniak into that defensive six role, where we got to see Rose Lavelle playing a little bit in that number 8 role at times, dropping lower a little bit in order to propel, an Ashley Sanchez up into the pitch and to help generate creativity and playmaking. Like, are we going to continue to see that? And it was nice to be able to get to ask him that, and basically him saying in this press conference and answering and saying that they do want to continue to see some different scenarios in SheBelieves Cup, and it's going to be a little different from what they saw in New Zealand, because there's going to be 3 matches instead of 2, and there's also going to be 3 different teams that you're going up against. So Lindsey Horan, right, is back on this roster. It's an official FIFA window, so I would anticipate she's going to be available for all of these matches versus just being available for one in that January camp. So I'm very curious to see what that middle 3 is going to look like. Are we going to see a return to the Andy Sullivan, Lindsey Horan, Rose Lavelle kind of middle trio there?
Yeah, I think we will. But I also thought we'd see that in January. We saw Taylor Korniak slotted in there. But then in this media availability, Vlatko Andonovski talking about those New Zealand friendlies and what he liked from the midfield in those. And he specifically highlighted the second half of the first friendly for the U.S. against New Zealand and the freedom that he gave the players to in the midfield to move and to have fluidity and to rotate around. And he really liked that. And Andy Sullivan was part of that midfield with Rose Lavelle and Lindsey Horan being in there. And I think that to him, I mean this positively, like it's safe, those 3 in the midfield, and you have to keep trying other things, right? Those 3 cannot play every game throughout the World Cup. They just won't, and they can't. So he has to be trying other things, and he has to be seeing if Taylor Korniak can slot in there. But I don't think, even if she can, she'll get the starting spot over Andy Sullivan come big match game time where things are on the line. There's a trophy on the line. There's a World Cup on the line, those types of situations. So yes, I think we are going to go back to seeing an Andy Sullivan, Lindsey Horan, Rose Lavelle midfield. but not all the time. That's the whole point of the SheBelieves Cup and playing these friendlies and playing these games in the months leading up to the World Cup. You have to be able to try other things and see what works, see what doesn't work, fail a little bit while still building up some of that consistency. That way, if Korniak is thrown into the defensive midfield role come game 3 of the group stage in the World Cup, she's not a chicken with her head cut off, and she knows how to play that role, and she knows how to do it against different kinds of opposition. And that's, I think, what we're going to see a lot against SheBelieves Cup, because between Canada, Japan, and Brazil, I mean, they're going to throw very different things at the United States. And I think it's going to test the defensive midfield 6 role a little bit more than we've seen, and our center backs for the United States. It's going to test them more than we've seen, especially most frequently in New Zealand when it was a bit of a slower start. Both sides were kind of getting their gears turning before they got into it.
You know, you're just popping into some core memories for me here as we're thinking about like the episodes that we did coming out of that January camp. I mean, we said that we're probably going to have more to talk about on the defensive side of things in this actual tournament than we were given opportunity to take a look at against New Zealand. So that's already something, a new component that we know we're probably going to have to take, a look at in terms of the opposition that they go up against in SheBelieves Cup.